The crimson dress clung to me like a second skin, a stark contrast to the starched white shirts I usually wore to work. Tonight was different. Tonight was the annual gala, a glittering affair filled with high-powered executives and their glamorous wives. A world away from spreadsheets and budget reports. David, bless his heart, fumbled with his tie, worry crinkling his brow. "You look amazing," he said, his voice laced with something that wasn't quite approval. "Are you sure about this?" I plastered on a smile, bright and practiced. "Absolutely. It'll be a good chance to network, loosen up a bit." The truth was a tangled mess, a yearning for excitement that our comfortable, predictable life lacked. David, a brilliant engineer but socially awkward, hovered at my side during introductions. But then, like a shark smelling blood, a man materialized beside me, tall, impeccably dressed, with a smile that could charm the socks off a CFO. "Ethan," he introduced himself, his handshake lingering a touch too long. "David, you must be the genius behind." Mentioned David's company. David nodded politely, seemingly oblivious. Ethan's gaze, however, stayed glued to me. "You look stunning," he murmured, his voice low and smooth. Lost in a sea of suits, I had to come find some color. My pulse quickened. Flattery, even empty flattery, was something I rarely received. But David, bless him again, was more about logic than compliments. The rest of the night became a blur. Ethan, a venture capitalist with a life as fast-paced as his expensive car, regaled me with stories of exotic locales and high-stakes deals. His world was a whirlwind compared to the predictable rhythm of mine. By the time the last champagne flute was emptied, a strange feeling bubbled in my stomach. Excitement? Curiosity? Whatever it was, it felt a euro wrong, but at the same time, thrillingly different. As we said goodbye, Ethan's eyes held a glint that sent shivers down my spine. "This shouldn't be the end of the conversation," he murmured, brushing his fingers against mine. "Perhaps lunch sometime? To discuss a Euro business opportunities?" The word, business, hung heavy in the air, a thin veil over the unspoken. My heart pounded in my chest, a chaotic drumbeat drowning out the rational voice in my head. I found myself nodding before I could stop myself. Walking back to the car, David's silence was a stark contrast to the buzz in my head. "He seems so Euro intense," he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. I shrugged, the heat rising to my cheeks. "Just an aggressive investor, don't worry." But even in the quiet of the car, with David beside me, a seed of something new had been planted, and a part of me, a reckless, curious part, couldn't wait to see where it would grow. The days that followed the gala were a strange mix of guilt and excitement. Every mention of Ethan at work sent a jolt through me. I'd catch myself stealing glances at his picture online, a thrill tingling in my fingertips as I scrolled through his jet-setting adventures. David, blissfully unaware, droned on about the latest project at dinner. Honestly, half the technical jargon went over my head. My mind was replaying the stolen kiss on the moonlit balcony, the soft brush of his lips a lingering sensation on my skin. The shame of it gnawed at me, a dull ache in my stomach, but it was overshadowed by the forbidden thrill of the secret, the knowledge that I was doing something I shouldn't. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. One afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was Ethan. "Lunch tomorrow?" The message read. "Same place?" A shiver ran down my spine, equal parts fear and anticipation. I glanced at David, typing away at his laptop, completely engrossed. My stomach twisted with guilt, a voice in my head screaming at me to ignore the message. But another voice, a rebellious one, whispered of stolen moments and exciting possibilities. With trembling fingers, I typed a quick response. "Sure. See you then." The guilt was a heavy weight, but the thrill of the unknown was even stronger. The next day, my lunch break felt like an eternity. David, bless his predictable routine, packed a healthy salad while I opted for something quick at my desk. The anticipation gnawed at me, a constant buzz beneath the surface. Finally, the clock struck 12. I grabbed my purse, a flimsy excuse about a client meeting forming on my lips. David barely looked up from his work. "See you later," he mumbled, oblivious to the churning storm in my chest. The restaurant was a bustling hub of lunchtime deals. I spotted Ethan in a corner booth, a smug smile playing on his lips. As I sat down, a wave of heat flushed my cheeks. "There you are," he said, his voice low and inviting. "Took you long enough." I mumbled an apology, the weight of my actions suddenly hitting me. We ordered. The conversation forced and awkward at first, but with every sip of wine, my inhibitions loosened. Ethan was everything David wasn't: charming, worldly, and exuding an aura of exciting danger. He spoke of exotic trips planned and high-stakes deals, a world far removed from the spreadsheets and deadlines of my everyday life. The hours flew by in a haze of laughter, flirting, and an undercurrent of something more. By the time I snuck back to the office, the guilt had morphed into a different kind of fear. What if David found out? The afternoon stretched before me, filled with stolen glances at my phone and annoying anxiety. For the first time, the thrill of the secret began to feel like a ticking time bomb, a dark stain on what had always been a safe and predictable world. My phone buzzed on the desk, a notification popping up on the screen. It was a simple message. "Lunch tomorrow?" The sender? Ethan. My heart hammered against my ribs like a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Every rational bone in my body screamed at me to ignore it, to delete the message and pretend it never existed. But the allure of escape, of a world outside the monotonous routine of work and home, was too strong to resist. With trembling fingers, I typed a quick reply. "Sure. Same place?" Shame flooded me as I hit send, the weight of my deceit pressing down on me. The next day stretched before me in an unbearable slow drip. David, oblivious, packed his usual healthy lunch while I settled for a quick sandwich at my desk. My stomach churned with nerves and guilt, a cocktail that soured my coffee and left a bitter residue on my tongue. Finally, the clock struck 12. I grabbed my purse, a flimsy excuse about a client meeting forming on my lips. David barely looked up from his computer. "See you later," he mumbled, his usual absent-minded goodbye. The restaurant was a familiar haven for our stolen lunches. Ethan was already in our usual booth, a triumphant smirk playing on his lips. As I sat down, a wave of heat flushed my cheeks, a stark contrast to the coldness spreading through my gut. The first few minutes were awkward, the conversation stilted and forced. But with every sip of wine, the tension loosened, the guilt temporarily pushed aside by the exhilarating danger of the situation. Ethan seemed to revel in my discomfort. He oozed an aura of confidence that David, for all his brilliance, lacked. He regaled me with stories of exotic locations and high-stakes deals, weaving a tapestry of adventure that was a stark contrast to the predictable rhythm of life with David. The hours flew by in a blur of laughter, hushed innuendos, and a constant dance of unspoken desires. By the time I snuck back to the office, the guilt had morphed into a different kind of fear. What if David found out? The afternoon dragged on, punctuated with stolen glances at my phone and a gnawing anxiety. For the first time, the thrill of the secret began to feel like a ticking time bomb. My seemingly perfect life, the one I built with David, felt precariously balanced on a knife's edge. That night at dinner, David seemed different, quieter, more observant. He watched me with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. "We haven't been ourselves lately," he finally said, his voice filled with a quiet concern that cracked through my carefully constructed facade. Panic surged through me, a primal urge to run and hide. "Work stress," I stammered, the flimsy excuse falling flat even to my own ears. David's gaze held mine, searching for something I couldn't define. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. A part of me hoped he wouldn't press further, wouldn't see the cracks appearing in the facade of our perfect marriage. But the other part, a tiny voice drowned out by fear and guilt, yearned for him to say something, anything, to bridge the chasm that was growing between us. David's brow furrowed, a crease forming between his usually carefree eyebrows. My flimsy excuse about work stress hung heavy in the air. I could practically feel his gaze dissecting me, searching for something hidden beneath the surface. "Is that all?" he finally asked, his voice soft but laced with a skepticism I hadn't heard before. Panic tightened its grip around my throat. I stammered, desperately searching for something, anything, to solidify my lie. But the words wouldn't come. He sighed. A long, weary exhale. "All right," he mumbled, pushing himself away from the table. "Long day, I guess." Relief washed over me, cold and fleeting. The weight of the secret, however, remained, a heavy stone lodged in my gut. Every stolen glance at my phone, every furtive text exchange with Ethan, felt like another chip breaking away from the carefully constructed facade of my life. The following weeks were a whirlwind of stolen lunches and hushed conversations. The thrill of the secret, initially exhilarating, began to curdle into a sickening dread. Ethan's touch, once exciting, now felt predatory, a constant reminder of the line I'd so easily crossed. One night, after a work event fueled by far too much champagne, things spiraled out of control. The blurry details of the night were filled with laughter, misplaced flirtations, and a growing sense of unease. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in a stranger's bed, sunlight streaming through the window, the sheets tangled around me. A wave of nausea washed over me, a physical manifestation of the dread that had been festering inside. This wasn't the exciting escape I'd craved. It was a terrifying descent into a world I didn't recognize. Back home, everything seemed different. David's usual smile seemed strained, his eyes holding a depth I hadn't noticed before. His questions about my day, once routine, now carried a new intensity, an unspoken suspicion that sent shivers down my spine. With every stolen glance, every nervous reply, I felt the carefully constructed facade I built around my life begin to crumble. It was like a sandcastle on the beach, slowly being eroded by the relentless tide of my deceit. Then, the final blow. One evening, as I checked my emails after work, a notification popped up on the screen. It was from Ethan's account, a weekend getaway confirmation for two, displayed on our home computer. My blood ran cold. The thrill of the secret had vanished, replaced by a paralyzing fear. The truth, like a rogue wave, was about to crash down on me, threatening to engulf everything I held dear. The email notification on the screen was a stark red beacon in the sea of mundane work emails. My breath hitched, and a cold dread pulled in my stomach. It was from Ethan's account, an open confirmation for a weekend getaway planned for two. Right there, on our home computer, David's voice, cold and hard, shattered the silence. "What is this?" He pointed at the screen, his eyes blazing with a fury I'd never seen before. The playful glint of curiosity I'd occasionally caught in them was replaced by a raw, burning anger. Lies tumbled from my lips, clumsy and desperate. I stammered about a work trip, a last-minute conference I'd forgotten to mention, but the words felt hollow even to my own ears. David saw through them easily, his face hardening into a mask of betrayal and pain. The air crackled with unspoken words, accusations hanging heavy in the room. I wanted to explain, to somehow rewind time and erase the consequences of my actions, but the words wouldn't come. All I could manage were choked sobs, tears spilling down my cheeks like a broken dam. The following days were a blur of tearful apologies and desperate pleas for forgiveness. I poured my heart out, bearing the ugly truth of my loneliness and the reckless thrill I'd chased with Ethan. But David, my David, remained shrouded in a shell of silence. The warmth and love that had once filled our home were replaced by a chilling emptiness that echoed in every corner. The lawyer arrived one afternoon, a crisp suit and a briefcase full of legalese. David's quiet efficiency during the consultation was a stark contrast to his usual gentle nature. Each word spoken felt like a hammer blow, slowly dismantling the life we'd built together. The weight of the impending divorce pressed down on me, suffocating. The future I'd taken for granted, the comfortable routine I'd craved an escape from, now seemed like a lost paradise. In a desperate attempt to salvage what was left, I contacted Ethan. But the charming voice that had initially seduced me was now devoid of warmth, laced with a hint of amusement. "It's out in the open then," he said, a cold nonchalance in his voice. "Seems like your little weekend getaway isn't happening." His words were a slap in the face, a brutal reminder of how easily I'd been manipulated. The thrill of the secret, the excitement of a forbidden world, had vanished, replaced by a bitter sting of betrayal, his and my own. Alone in the wreckage of my decisions, I was left with nothing but the deafening silence in our once loving home and the crushing weight of regret. The comfortable life I'd yearned for escape from was now a distant memory, replaced by a frightening uncertainty that stretched before me like a vast, empty road. Ethan's voice on the phone, devoid of concern or even a hint of apology, slammed into me like a physical blow. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. He never cared. I was just a fleeting thrill, a notch on his designer belt in the grand adventure of his life. Tears streamed down my face, a bitter cocktail of regret and humiliation. The following weeks were a blur of legalese and heartbreak. David, once my confidant, the person I shared every thought and worry with, became a stranger shrouded in legal jargon and quiet contemplation. The lawyer, a constant presence, spoke in terms of assets and settlements, further solidifying the cold reality of our situation. My parents arrived, their faces etched with concern and a hint of disappointment I couldn't bear to meet. Their questions were unspoken, hovering in the strange silence like accusing ghosts. I retreated further into myself, a shell of the woman I once was, haunted by the memories of our shattered life. Evenings were the worst. The empty space beside me on the couch, the untouched plate at the dinner table, each detail a stark reminder of the warmth and connection I'd so carelessly thrown away. The silence in our once shared home was a deafening roar, filled with the echoes of whispered promises and broken vows. I clung desperately to the hope that David would see past my betrayal, that we could somehow rebuild the life I'd so carelessly destroyed. But with each passing day, with every curt exchange and every averted glance, that hope dwindled. In his eyes, I saw a flicker of something that looked suspiciously like a Euro pity. It was a far cry from the love and warmth that had once been there, and it gnawed at me more than any accusation ever could. One night, unable to bear the suffocating silence any longer, I broke down. Tears streamed down my face as I confessed everything. My yearning for excitement, the initial thrill of Ethan's attention, and the sickening realization of his true intentions. David listened, his face impassive, his silence a wall I couldn't penetrate. Finally, when I had run out of words, he spoke, his voice low and devoid of emotion. "It's too late," he said simply. The finality in his voice shattered the last remnants of hope I clung to. The weight of his words settled on me like a shroud. The future I'd once taken for granted, the comfortable routine I'd craved and escaped from, now seemed like a lost paradise. I had chased a fleeting thrill and ended up destroying everything I truly valued. The path ahead stretched before me, a vast and empty landscape filled with uncertainty and the crushing weight of regret. The day of the divorce hearing arrived, a cold, sterile echo of the warmth and joy that had marked our wedding day. The air in the courtroom felt heavy, thick with unspoken emotions and the weight of shattered vows. Each word uttered by the lawyers, each legal term tossed around, was a hammer blow to my already fractured heart. David sat across from me, a stranger bound by a shared past. His face, usually etched with warmth and kindness, now seemed older, the lines around his eyes deeper. A spark of sadness flickered in them, a sadness that mirrored my own. As the judge spoke the final words, severing the legal ties that had bound us, a choked sob escaped my lips. The weight of my actions pressed down on me, suffocating. The life I'd built, the life I'd taken for granted, was now a collection of memories echoing in the sterile emptiness of the courtroom. Stepping outside, the world seemed muted, devoid of the vibrant colors it once held. The familiar city streets looked foreign, the bustling crowds a cacophony of noise that failed to penetrate the fog of grief and regret that clouded my mind. The future stretched before me, an uncertain path I would have to navigate alone. The empty house, once a haven of love and laughter, now felt like a tomb. Every corner held a silent accusation, every object a painful reminder of the life I'd so carelessly destroyed. The worn armchair where David used to read, The chipped coffee mug he always used in the mornings, each detail a shard of a shattered dream. I wandered through the rooms, a ghost haunting the ruins of my own happiness. The silence was deafening, punctuated only by the echo of my own footsteps and the relentless whisper of regret. Picking up a framed photo from happier times, a wave of despair washed over me. It was a picture of us on our wedding day, smiles as bright as the future we'd envisioned. The carefree joy in our eyes was a stark contrast to the emptiness that stared back at me now. Tears streamed down my face, blurring the image in the frame. A single question echoed in the vast emptiness of the house, a question with no easy answer. How, in chasing a fleeting thrill, had I managed to destroy everything that truly mattered? Reaching out to friends felt like wading through mud. Shame, a heavy shroud, choked any words that tried to form. Their concerned texts and calls went unanswered, the guilt a physical barrier pushing them away. I was adrift in a sea of regret, isolated from the world I once knew. Days bled into weeks, a dull ache settling permanently in my chest. The fleeting thrill I chased had morphed into a constant, gnawing emptiness. Every corner of the once familiar house held a painful reminder of what I'd lost. One afternoon, sorting through a box of forgotten belongings, I stumbled upon a treasure trove of happier times. Photos captured us in younger, carefree versions of ourselves, faces beaming with genuine joy. Love letters, filled with sweet nothings and whispered promises, brought tears stinging to my eyes. Buried beneath the mementos, I found a well-worn copy of a book, a gift from David on our anniversary. The title, Second Chances, seemed to mock me from the worn cover. Yet, a flicker of hope, fragile yet persistent, ignited within me. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to rebuild what I'd so carelessly destroyed. Taking a deep breath, I decided to focus on myself. I enrolled in an art class, a passion I'd neglected during my marriage. The vibrant colors and the freedom of expression became a form of therapy, each brushstroke a way to paint over the cracks in my shattered life. Slowly, tentatively, I reconnected with old friends. Apologies tumbled out, heartfelt and raw. Forgiveness, though hesitant at first, began to bloom, fragile but hopeful. Weeks turned into months. The raw pain dulled to a manageable ache, replaced by a quiet determination to rebuild my life, brick by broken brick. One evening, while showcasing my work at an art exhibition, who knew 5 years could fly by so fast? I mused aloud, staring at the candlelit table my husband, Jake, had set up. It was our 5th anniversary, and he'd gone all out. Candles, roses, my favorite pasta dish. I should have been over the moon, but instead, I felt a knot in my stomach. As he raised his glass, his smile didn't reach his eyes. To us, he toasted, but his voice lacked its usual warmth. I echoed his words, but my mind was elsewhere. Midway through the meal, my phone buzzed. A text from my boss, Mr. Reynolds. Can't stop thinking about our last meeting. Dinner soon? My heart skipped a beat. I quickly hid the phone under my napkin, but not before Jake's sharp eyes caught the action. Everything okay? He asked, his eyebrows knitting together. Work stuff. I replied too quickly, plastering a fake smile on my face. The following weeks were a blur of late nights at the office and hushed phone calls I thought Jake didn't notice. But he did. His casual inquiries about my work hours and who I was talking to became more frequent. I brushed them off, saying it was just the stress of the new project I was working on. Then came the promotion. It felt like a victory, but Jake's reaction was lukewarm. Isn't Reynolds your boss? Seems like he's favoring you a bit too much, he remarked one night, his tone laced with suspicion. I laughed it off, telling him he was imagining things. But the truth was, my relationship with Mr. Reynolds had crossed professional boundaries. I was walking on a tightrope, balancing my marriage and this exhilarating but dangerous liaison with my boss. One night, I told Jake I had to work late again. I left in a hurry, not noticing him following me from a distance. I met Mr. Reynolds at a discreet downtown bar, our usual spot for clandestine meetings. We talked, laughed, and he touched my hand across the table. I was so caught up in the moment that I didn't see Jake standing outside, watching us through the window. When I got home, Jake confronted me. So, working late? Huh? The hurt in his voice was unmistakable. I stood there, frozen, words failing me for the first time. The reality of what I was risking hit me hard. But it was too late. The trust between us was shattered, like a glass dropped on a hard floor. Jake had seen enough, and so had I. The realization of my betrayal, the love I was jeopardizing, all came crashing down on me. But the worst part? I wasn't sure if I was ready to give up the thrill of the forbidden for the comfort of the familiar. Business trip to Atlanta. I lied smoothly, avoiding Jake's gaze. He nodded, distracted by the morning news. I felt a pang of guilt, but brushed it aside. This weekend with Mr. Reynolds was something I convinced myself I deserved. A break from the mundane. A step into a world where I felt wanted, alive. The getaway was a blur of luxury and forbidden romance. Mr. Reynolds made me feel like I was the center of his universe. But every stolen moment was shadowed by the reality I was leaving behind. Returning home, I found Jake waiting up. His eyes, usually so warm, were cold and probing. "How was the trip?" he asked, his voice edged with suspicion. "Fine. Just the usual meetings," I replied, my voice a little too high-pitched. But Jake wasn't buying it. "Are you seeing someone else?" he asked directly, his eyes searching mine for the truth. I felt cornered, trapped. "That's ridiculous, Jake. I'm just really busy with work," I countered, my voice steady but my heart racing. Days passed, and the distance between us grew. I spent more time at work, more nights away. Home felt like a battleground. Each conversation with Jake a delicate dance around the truth. Then, one day, he found it. The receipt from the hotel. I'd been careless, leaving it in my purse. When I came home, he was sitting at the kitchen table, the damning piece of paper in front of him. "Is there anything you want to tell me?" he asked, his voice eerily calm. I looked at him, then at the receipt, and knew my web of lies had unraveled. But I wasn't ready to confess. Not yet. "It's not what you think," I said. But even to my ears, it sounded weak. The air between us was thick with unspoken words and broken trust. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I told Jake I needed space, time to think. "Maybe we should separate for a while," I suggested, my voice barely a whisper. His reaction was one of resigned sadness, not anger or surprise. He just nodded, and in that moment, I felt like I'd lost something precious. But the thrill of the affair, the allure of being desired, was a siren song I couldn't resist. As I packed a bag with my essentials, I glanced back at the life I was leaving behind. A life of comfort, stability, and love. A life with Jake. But the path I was choosing was different, uncertain, and dangerously exciting. And as I closed the door behind me, I couldn't help but wonder if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. New beginnings. I captioned the photo of the sleek downtown apartment I now shared with Mr. Reynolds. It felt thrilling yet surreal. This new chapter of my life, splashed across social media for all to see. The likes and comments poured in. A mix of surprise, envy, and thinly veiled judgment. Jake found out, of course. He must have seen the post or heard through our intertwined network of friends. One evening, he showed up unannounced, standing at my new doorstep, a mix of hope and despair in his eyes. "I miss you," he said simply, his voice cracking. "Please, let's try to work this out." I stood there, torn. Here was the man I'd shared my life with, offering forgiveness. Yet I was drawn to this new, exhilarating life with Mr. Reynolds. "I can't, Jake. I'm sorry," I whispered, closing the door on my past, on a love that had turned into a memory. Life with Mr. Reynolds was a whirlwind of luxury and travel. He promised me the world, and it seemed he was more than capable of delivering it. We jetted off to exotic locations, dined at the finest restaurants, and I was showered with gifts and attention. I documented it all on social media, a showcase of my glamorous new life. But as I scrolled through my feed, flaunting this seemingly perfect world, I couldn't ignore the whispers and stares, both online and in real life. Friends began to distance themselves, their messages becoming less frequent, their tones changing from warm to formal. I was becoming a topic of gossip, my choices a subject of debate. Meanwhile, Jake's absence from my life grew more pronounced. I heard through mutual friends that he was struggling, that my leaving had hit him hard. He was falling into a depression, they said, feeling abandoned and betrayed. Guilt gnawed at me, but I pushed it aside, telling myself I deserved happiness, no matter the cost. Yet, in the quiet moments, away from the glitz and glamour, I couldn't help but reflect on what I'd left behind. There was a simplicity and honesty in my life with Jake that no amount of luxury could replace. But the allure of this new lifestyle, the intoxication of being desired and pampered, was a powerful drug, and I was fully addicted. As I posted another photo of a lavish dinner or a stunning sunset view from a beach resort, part of me wondered if the shine of this new life would ever wear off. If beneath the surface of these perfect images, I would find true contentment, or just a hollow echo of what I once had. The more I flaunted this life, the more I felt the weight of the choices I'd made, and the more I wondered if happiness was truly found in the arms of luxury, or in the warmth of a love I had so carelessly left behind. Have you heard about her? That's what they whispered now when I walked by. The rumors about my affair with Mr. Reynolds had spread like wildfire, tainting my reputation. Where once I was greeted with smiles, now there were only hushed tones and judgmental glares. I told myself it didn't matter, that my happiness was all that was important. But deep down, each whisper felt like a stab at my dignity. Then, the divorce papers arrived. I wasn't surprised, but the finality of it hit me hard. Jake's signature at the bottom was a quiet surrender, a closing of a chapter that had once been filled with love and promise. I signed them too, telling myself this was for the best, but my heart felt heavy, burdened with the weight of what I had lost. Life with Mr. Reynolds started to change. The man who once wooed me with gifts and sweet nothings began to reveal a controlling side. He dictated what I wore, who I saw, even what I posted on social media. The freedom I thought I had gained by leaving Jake slowly morphed into a gilded cage. Meanwhile, I heard through the grapevine that Jake was doing better. He was focusing on himself, his career. Friends said he seemed happier, more at peace. Hearing this should have brought me some relief, but instead, it deepened the ache of regret. He was moving on, rebuilding his life, while mine felt like it was starting to crumble. The final blow came unexpectedly. I stumbled upon a conversation between Mr. Reynolds and a colleague, a young, ambitious woman from the office. Their flirtatious banter, hidden behind closed doors, was a mirror of how we had once been. The realization that he was cheating on me, just as I had done to Jake, was a cruel twist of fate. I confronted him, my voice shaking with anger and betrayal, but he just shrugged it off, telling me I was being paranoid, overreacting. The irony of it wasn't lost on me. I had been on the other side of this conversation, telling Jake the same lies, weaving the same web of deceit. The apartment that once felt like a sanctuary now felt like a prison. The luxury and excitement that had lured me away from my marriage now seemed hollow, tainted by lies and infidelity. As I lay in bed that night, the reality of my situation settled in. I had left a man who loved me for a fantasy, and now that fantasy was crumbling, leaving me alone, with a tarnished reputation and a heart full of regret. The choices I had made, driven by a selfish pursuit of happiness, had led me to this point. A point where I was neither happy nor at peace. I realized too late that the grass wasn't always greener on the other side, and sometimes, by the time you see the truth, it's already too late. Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying the video so far. If you do, please take a moment to hit that like button. It really helps me out and lets me know you appreciate the content. Also, if you haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel. Subscribing is a great way to stay updated with all the latest videos and to be part of our growing community. It's quick, it's free, and it ensures you won't miss out on any upcoming content. So go ahead, smash that like button and hit subscribe. Your support means a lot and keeps this channel going. Thanks for watching. I'm not blind, Robert, I yelled, my voice echoing off the walls of his sleek office. I know about you and her. My boss, Robert Reynolds, stood there, his expression cold, unfazed by my outburst. He tried to dismiss it, but I wouldn't let it go. The argument escalated, our words sharp and cutting. In a fit of anger, he fired me. Professional differences, he said, but we both knew it was personal. I walked out of that office, my head spinning. I had lost my job, my dignity, and myself. Desperate and alone. I went to the only person I thought might still care. I stood outside Jake's door, rehearsing my apology. But when he opened the door, the look in his eyes stopped me. It wasn't anger or sadness. It was indifference. I can't, Laura, he said simply, before closing the door. I stood there, a rejected woman, my pleas for forgiveness left unspoken. The friends I once had started distancing themselves. Invitations dried up, calls went unanswered. The few who did talk to me made their disapproval clear. You made your bed, they said. The social circle I had once been a part of now shut me out, their judgment clear in their averted eyes. Meanwhile, I heard about Jake's success. He had received a prestigious award at work, his career reaching new heights. The news should have been a source of joy, but for me, it was a painful reminder of what I had lost. I scrolled through his social media, his smile bright and confident, surrounded by colleagues and friends. He was thriving, moving on from the wreckage I had left behind. I realized then how much he had grown, how far he had come from the man I had left. Sitting alone in my small, rented apartment, the walls seemed to close in on me. The contrast between my life and Jake's was stark. He had found strength and success in the aftermath of our broken marriage, while I was left grappling with the consequences of my choices. The realization that I had been the architect of my own downfall was a bitter pill to swallow. My affair, my lies, my betrayal had led me here to a place of loneliness and regret. I had sacrificed a life built on love and trust for a fleeting thrill, and now I was paying the price. As I lay in bed that night, the silence overwhelming, I couldn't escape the truth I had made a series of choices that had led me to this moment. Choices that had cost me my marriage, my friends, and my self-respect. And as I drifted off to sleep, a single thought haunted me: had it all been worth it? The silence of the empty apartment echoed my despair. I'd been job hunting for weeks, but every door seemed to slam shut in my face. My tarnished reputation had preceded me. Whispers of my affair and the scandal at my previous job made sure of that. I was struggling to make ends meet, my savings dwindling with each passing day. Meanwhile, Jake, my ex-husband, was moving on. Through the grapevine, I heard he was dating again. Her name was Emily, a colleague from his office, known for her kindness and intelligence. They were a stark contrast to the turbulent and secretive relationship I had with Mr. Reynolds. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of jealousy, imagining Jake finding happiness with someone else. As my financial woes deepened, the inevitable happened. A notice of eviction was slipped under my door. I had fallen too far behind on rent. Staring at the cold, official letter, reality hit me hard. I was about to lose my home. Around the same time, Jake made a grand gesture, proposing to Emily in a romantic, elaborate setup. Pictures of the proposal flooded social media. A beautiful sunset, a violinist, rose petals. It was straight out of a fairy tale. It was a painful reminder of what I had lost, of the life I could have had if I hadn't been so reckless. In a moment of weakness and overwhelming jealousy, I concocted a plan to sabotage their relationship. I reached out to Emily under the guise of offering my congratulations, but with the hidden agenda of sowing seeds of doubt about Jake's character. It was a desperate, spiteful move, driven by a mix of regret and bitterness. I met her for coffee, spinning tales of Jake's supposed faults and past mistakes. I watched her face for signs of doubt, but Emily's response was not what I expected. She listened patiently, then gently told me, "I understand you're hurt, but Jake has been nothing but honest and supportive. I think it's time you move on and find your happiness, just as he has." Her words were a wake-up call. I had become someone I didn't recognize, vindictive, petty, and consumed by jealousy. As I walked back to my soon-to-be lost apartment, I realized how far I had fallen. I had tried to destroy someone else's happiness out of spite, and it had only highlighted my own misery and loneliness. Sitting amidst packed boxes, the remnants of my failed attempt at sabotage weighing heavily on me, I understood that my actions were driven by a refusal to face the consequences of my choices. Jake had moved on, building a new life with someone who respected and supported him, while I was stuck in a cycle of regret and self-pity. It was time to take responsibility for my life, to stop blaming others for my downfall. I had to find a way to rebuild, to start anew, even if it meant facing a future full of uncertainties. The road ahead would be difficult, but it was necessary. I had lost much, but I still had the chance to reclaim my integrity and build a life, not on the ruins of what I had destroyed, but on the lessons I had learned. In a small town where everyone knows everyone, my actions at the cafe with Emily didn't just ripple, they caused a tidal wave. Within hours, the confrontation between Jake, Emily, and me was the talk of the town. I could feel the weight of every judgmental stare and hushed whisper as I walked down the street. My attempt to sabotage Jake's relationship had backfired, turning me into the villain of the town's latest drama. The news of their marriage soon followed. Pictures of their wedding flooded social media. A beautiful outdoor ceremony, her in a stunning white dress, him looking happier than I'd ever seen him. It was a stark contrast to the mess I'd made of my own life. The sight of their joy was a painful reminder of the love I once had and lost through my own folly. Amidst this personal turmoil, fate seemed to twist the knife further. I got into a car accident, a moment of distraction turning catastrophic. My luxury car, one of the last symbols of the life I thought I wanted, was totaled. Standing there, amidst the twisted metal, I realized how far I'd fallen. From a woman envied for her seemingly perfect life to someone pitted and whispered about. Meanwhile, Jake and Emily embarked on their dream honeymoon. Pictures of them exploring exotic locations, their smiles wide and genuine, filled my social media feed. The stark difference between our lives was like a cold slap. Here I was, dealing with the aftermath of a car crash, both literal and metaphorical, while they were basking in the glow of newlywed bliss. The whispers around town grew louder. I was the subject of pitying glances and disapproving shakes of the head. The once admired woman who had it all was now a cautionary tale. The gossip wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about how I had spiraled downward since. I tried to keep my head high, to ignore the murmurs and stares, but each one felt like a tiny cut, slowly draining my resolve. I was a pariah in my own town, a ghost of the person I used to be. As I scrolled through Jake and Emily's honeymoon photos, a realization dawned on me. Their happiness was a result of choices made with love and respect, while my misery was born from decisions driven by selfishness and recklessness. They had built something beautiful together, something I had once had the chance to have but threw away. Sitting alone in my sparse apartment, the reality of my situation hit me hard. I had lost more than a husband and a luxury car. I had lost myself, my dignity, and the respect of those around me. The road to redemption, if there was one, seemed long and uncertain. But as I looked at the mess I'd made of my life, I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep going down this path. It was time to face my mistakes, to rebuild my life from the rubble of my poor choices. The journey would be hard, but it was necessary. I had to find a way back to the person I once was, to find peace in the aftermath of the storm I had created. Sitting alone in my sparsely furnished apartment, the walls seemed to close in on me. I was destitute, both in wealth and in spirit, a far cry from the life I once boasted about. My reflection in the mirror showed a woman I barely recognize, worn, tired, and filled with regret. Each decision I had made, each step that had led me here, played over in my mind like a broken record. Word of my situation reached Jake, and I half expected, maybe even hoped, he would offer some help. But he didn't. He knew of my struggles, yet chose to stay away. It was a decision I understood, but one that stung deeply. It was the final severing of any ties we had, a clear message that I was truly on my own. In a desperate attempt to rebuild some bridges, I reached out to old friends. The same friends who had been at my wedding, who had shared countless laughs and memories with me. But their responses were cold, distant. "You made your bed," one texted back. The rejection was a bitter pill to swallow. I had alienated everyone who once cared about me, and now I was reaping the consequences. As if to twist the knife further, I saw the announcement on social media, Jake and Emily were expecting a child. The picture of them, beaming with joy, was a stark reminder of the life I could have had. A life filled with love, stability, and now, a growing family. I had dreamed of starting a family with Jake, and seeing him do so with someone else was a painful reminder of the future I had thrown away. I sat there, scrolling through their pictures, each one a testament to their happiness. The love and excitement were palpable, even through the screen, and with each photo, the weight of my regret grew heavier. I had sacrificed a man who loved me, a man who was now going to be a father, for a fleeting thrill that had left me with nothing but sorrow. In the quiet of my apartment, I couldn't escape the truth. My actions, driven by selfish desires and reckless decisions, had led me here. I had chosen a path that brought me momentary excitement but lasting pain. And now, as I watched Jake build the life I once dreamt of with him, the reality of what I had lost hit me harder than ever. I was alone, a shadow of the person I once was. The journey ahead seemed daunting. There were no easy fixes, no quick solutions. I had to face the consequences of my actions, learn from my mistakes, and somehow find a way to rebuild my life. It was going to be a long road, but it was one I had to walk, step by painful step, if I ever hoped to find peace and redemption. Life, as they say, goes on. For Jake, it moved in leaps and bounds. Emily gave birth to a beautiful baby girl, and their joy was palpable, even from the distance of my life to theirs. The photos of their little family, cradling the newborn, were a constant on social media, a reminder of the life and love that was flourishing without me. Meanwhile, I found myself working at a local diner, a far cry from the plush office job I once prided myself on. The pay was meager, barely enough to cover my bills, let alone the mounting debts that seemed to grow each day. I served coffee and pie with a forced smile, each order a reminder of the stark contrast between my current reality and my past life of luxury. As if to underscore this contrast, I learned that Jake and his family moved into a new, luxurious home. It was everything we had once dreamed of together, a big, beautiful house in the best part of town. I stumbled upon a picture of it online, a sprawling estate with a manicured lawn, and felt a sharp twinge of something. Envy, regret, loss, it was hard to tell. Around the same time, my past caught up with me. Legal notices started arriving, each one a stark reminder of the debts I had accrued during my time with Mr. Reynolds. The unpaid credit card bills, the loans I had taken out, they all demanded attention I couldn't afford to give. I was drowning in a sea of financial troubles, with no lifeline in sight. Then came the news that felt like a punch to the gut. Jake's child, the little girl I had seen grow from a newborn to a bubbly toddler in pictures, was starting kindergarten. They threw a small party to celebrate, a family event full of laughter and joy. Pictures of the celebration found their way to me, showing a happy family, a united front of love and togetherness. Sitting in my small, cramped apartment, the walls adorned with peeling paint rather than happy family portraits, the reality of my situation hit me hard. Jake had moved on, built a new life, a family, a home, everything we had once dreamed of doing together. And here I was, struggling to make ends meet, dealing with legal issues, and serving pies to strangers to get by. The disparity between our lives was stark and painful. I had traded a future of love and happiness for a fleeting affair that left me with nothing but regrets. As I lay in bed that night, the sounds of the city a dull roar outside my window, I couldn't help but reflect on the choices I had made. How different things might have been if I had chosen differently, if I had valued what I had with Jake, if I had not been blinded by temptation and excitement. But life doesn't afford us the luxury of rewinds or do-overs. The choices we make shape our paths, and sometimes, those paths lead us to places of hardship and regret. As I drifted off to sleep, the images of Jake's happy family life contrasting sharply with the four walls of my lonely existence. I knew one thing for sure. The road to redemption was long, and I was just at the beginning. The diner's clattering dishes and sizzling grills were a stark backdrop to my deteriorating health. Sleepless nights and anxiety-filled days took their toll. I could feel my body rebelling against the stress and the less than ideal living conditions of my small, dingy apartment. Every cough felt deeper, every ache more pronounced. I knew I needed to see a doctor, but without insurance, it was just another entry on a long list of unaffordables. In stark contrast, Jake's life was flourishing. He had become a well-respected figure in our community, involved in local charities and events. I would hear about his achievements occasionally, fundraisers he organized, awards he received. His success was a testament to his character, the same character I had once fallen in love with, and then so carelessly discarded. As I lay in my bed, the sparse room spinning slightly around me, I couldn't escape the haunting thoughts of what could have been. My life was filled with regret, a constant reminder of the consequences of my actions. I had betrayed a man who loved me, chased after a mirage of excitement and luxury, and ended up alone and broken. The realization was a bitter pill, each day a reminder of my foolishness. Then came a moment that felt like a cruel twist of fate. I saw a social media post, a reflection